In this video, you're going to write some test cases that verify our delete route works as expected. Now, before we get into that, what we're going to do is make one quick change to the delete route to make it match our other routes. Our other routes return an object, and on that object, the response body, we have a to-do property, and we did the same thing for the to-dos call right here. On the response body, we have the to-dos property, and that stores the array. For the delete request, we never did that. What I'm going to do is send back an object as the response body where the to-do property equals the to-do that got deleted, although we'll just use that ES6 syntax to send that back. With this in place, we can now go ahead and write some test cases that verify the delete route works as expected. And this is going to happen at the very bottom of our server test file. I'm going to create a new describe block for the delete /todos /:id route. Right here, we'll provide our arrow function, and we can go ahead and call it 3 times. The first test case, it should remove a to-do. This is going to be test case number 1. It's going to verify that when we pass in an ID that does exist inside of the to-dos collection, the item gets removed. Next up, it should return 404 if to-do not found. If we try to delete the to-do, but nothing was actually deleted, we're going to send a 404 back so the user knows that the call probably didn't work as expected. Yes, the call didn't necessarily fail, but you never deleted the item you wanted to delete, so we are going to consider that a failure. And that's what we did when we sent the 404 back. The last test we're going to write, it should return 404 if object ID is invalid. This test is going to verify that when we have an invalid object ID, we do get a 404 back, which is the expected response status code. Now, these 2 tests we'll fill out a little bit later. We're going to go ahead and focus on this one because this is where we're going to need to do a few complex things. Not only are we going to need to send off the request, after the request comes back, we're going to want to assert some things about it. And we're going to want to query the database, making sure that to-do was actually removed from the to-dos collection. The first thing I'm going to do is figure out which to-do I want to delete. We have 2 options up above. I'm going to go ahead and delete the second to-do item, though that choice is irrelevant. You could easily just do this with the first one. Down below, we'll create a hex ID variable like we did for our previous test case. We're going to set that equal to the second item from the to-dos array. Then we're going to go ahead and grab its ID property, calling the toHex string method. Now that we have the hex ID for the second to-do item, we can start worrying about making the request. Right here, I'm going to call request, passing in the app we want to make the request to. Then we can call delete, which is going to trigger a delete HTTP request. The following URL is going to have some variables injected into it, so I will use template strings. It's /todos / followed by the ID. I'm going to inject the hex ID variable. Now that we have our delete method all set up, we can move on to start making our expectations. We're going to expect that we get a 200 back. We should get a 200 because this ID is going to exist in the database. Next up, we can assert that the data comes back as the response body. I'm going to make a custom expect call, passing in our function, where we have the response argument sent in, and all we're going to do is assert that the ID is the ID right here. We're going to expect that the response body property has a to-do prop, where the _ID property equals the hex ID, to be hex ID. If this is the case, then we can verify the call pretty much worked as expected. Now, the last thing we need to do is query the database and make sure the item was actually removed. I'm going to call end, passing in a callback so we can do a few asynchronous things before we wrap up the test case. End, if you remember, gets called with an error and the response. If there is an error, we're going to need to handle that because otherwise there's no need to query the database. If error, we're going to return to prevent the function execution. Done, passing in that error, so the error gets rendered by Mocha. Now we can go ahead and make the query, and this is actually going to be your challenge for the video. What I want you to do is query database using find by ID. You're going to try to find the to-do item that has this ID. Now, when you try to find that ID, it should fail. You should get nothing back. You're going to create that to-do variable in your then call and make sure it does not exist. You can make sure something doesn't exist using the to not exist assertion. That would look something like this. We're expecting null to not exist. Although instead of null, you'll pass in the to-do argument, which is going to be in your success handler. Now, this usually would contain the to-do item, but since we've just deleted it, it should not exist. This is going to get all of that done. Now, if there is an error, you're going to do the exact same thing we did up above in our test case for post to-dos. Right here, we simply add a catch clause, passing the error through to done. Now that you know what to do, it's your job to get it done. What I'd like you to do is fill this out. Fill out the query, make sure to handle the errors, make sure to call done. Then you can go ahead and run the test suite, verifying that this test case passes. These two are going to fail, so for the moment, I'm just going to comment them out. They're going to fail because we have a done argument specified, but we never call it, so the test will time out after 2 seconds. Take a moment to knock this out, run the test suite, make sure it works as expected, and when you're done, click play. I hope you were able to get that done. The first thing to do is call to-do find by ID, passing in that hex ID. This is the item that should have gotten deleted. Now we can call then, passing in our callback. It is going to get called with the doc, the to-do variable, and all we're going to do is verify that it does not exist. We just deleted it, so find by ID should return null for the doc. We're going to expect that the to-do variable does not exist using the to not exist method available on that expect library. Now we do need to call done to wrap up the test case. From here, we can go ahead and call catch. I'm going to call catch, grabbing that error argument and passing it through to done. There's no need to provide curly braces here. We just have one statement, so we can use the shortcut, which is available in ES6 for arrow functions. With our actual query in place, we can remove the comments that outlined what was supposed to happen, and we can run the test case. Over inside of the terminal, we can now run the test suite to verify that everything we set up worked as expected. Over here, I'm going to use npm run test-watch to start up our test suite with nodemon. And when it runs, we see that we have our one test under the delete describe block, and it is passing. Should remove a to-do, passed without any errors. Now that we have our one test case in place, we can fill out the two other ones. These test cases are going to be basically identical to the test cases we have above for the get to do by ID route. There's no shame in copying and pasting code when you, 1, know exactly what the code does. We know what it does because we wrote it, and 2, we actually do need it. We can't reuse it. We need to tweak it just a little bit, so it does make sense to copy. I'm going to copy this. This is for the should return 404 if to do not found test, and we're going to paste that into the exact same test for the delete route. And all we have to do is change get to delete, save the file. This is going to rerun the test suite, and now we have two tests under delete. They are both passing. You can see our last test still fails, so we can go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to copy the code right here, which verifies that non-object IDs cause a 404. I'm going to paste it in here, changing the get method call to delete. If I save the file, it's going to rerun the test suite, and this time around, all 9 test cases are passing. With this in place, we now have delete to-dos tested. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up by making a commit over inside of the terminal. Over here, I'm going to run git status to see what changes I got going on. Everything looks good. We made one small change to the server file, and we added our tests to the server test file. I can use git commit with the AM flag to make a commit. And a good message for this one would be test the delete to-dos by ID route. I'm going to take that commit and push it up to GitHub, and there's no need to deploy to Heroku since we haven't created anything visually different. We did tweak the server code just a little bit, but we'll worry about that a little bit later. For now, everything is good. We can move on to the next video where you are going to create the final route for managing to-dos. This is going to be a route that lets you update a to-do. I'm excited to get to it, so stay tuned. I will see you next time.